Shalom, shalom, everyone. And thank you for joining the House of Shiloh Ministry once again to continue in Paul's letters. We are in the series that defines the audience of the Pauline epistles, and this is part 9, sponsored by the House of Shiloh Ministry and presented by yours truly, Brother Andrew Grant. We were finishing up the first letter to the Corinthians in the last section, part 8. So now we're going to go ahead and begin our lesson in the second letter of Corinthians. And we'll go ahead and get this started. No matter what or how you look at it, there is only one audience to Paul's letters. And all you got to do is take your time, read through it. Do not assume you know. Pay attention to the small words, and you'll quickly understand that there's more to it. So let's begin with chapter 3, verse 3. For as much as ye are manifestly declared to be the epistle of Mashiach ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living Elohim, or the Ruach of the living Elohim, not in tables of stone, but in fleshly tables of the heart. We know those tables of stones, right? There's the 10 Commandments. And notice Paul didn't say the tables are no more, right? But the stones itself are no more. Mm-hmm. This also helps us understand, and I didn't put it in his bullet point, but he says not in tables of stone. He's referencing, therefore, that these Corinthians were once the group who received those tables and stones. You're not getting it the same way you got it in the past. We're not taught to look at it this way, are we?
No.
Why do one reference and bring it to the other reference, which he's going to now with the fleshly tables of the heart? Why bring it that way? When you're referencing the stone, you're referencing a people in the past. And that's what he's telling the Corinthians they are. But where is Paul getting this particular statement of his? Where else is it mentioned as well? Do we ask ourselves that? Paul has all these sayings, all these statements, and he gives clues that they were once written, or it's written, or the scriptures. He says things like that. But if you read the Bible enough, you'll recognize this phrase, and you've seen it somewhere before. So let's figure out, where Paul got this from. All right, before we start, any questions?
No, but I have a comment though. I believe,
yes, ma'am.
I believe one of the reasons he phrases it this way, because he's showing that there is a transference of what was written on stone is being written in the heart. It's not something it's not the commandments that were written on stone, and then what is written in the heart is something different. He's showing that what was written on stone is being transferred to be written in the heart. So I think he wrote it that way for that reason.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And we're going to elaborate on that and prove that point, because we're going to show the context of what was written. And because the context hasn't changed, then we know the medium that was used to be written on has changed.
Uh-huh.
Not the actual context or the substance that's written on that media. Mm-hmm. So they went from 8-track to digital.
There it is.
Same song, just a far better media.
Thank you. That's it.
You got it on an 8-track, but now you can get it over the top, as we say in my company. You don't even have to go out to the store to get it. I don't have to go to a priest, to get the truth. When the Bible's right here, I just got to read the Ruach guide. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna get it over the top. Now, don't get me wrong. You need a minister. I'm not saying that. I'm just making a point. That's all. All right. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide, and I'll have Minister White be my first reader. Where is Paul getting this from? These stone tablets and the fleshly heart. Go ahead, Minister.
He's getting it from Jeremiah. Jeremiah 31, verse 33. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith Yahuwah, I will put my Torah in their inward parts, and write it, Torah, in their hearts, and it will be their Elohim. And will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Did you want me to read the next one as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I guess I left the I out of there.
I'm sorry.
I might have left that I out of there. I apologize. Go right ahead.
No problem. Hebrews 8, verse 10. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith Yahuwah. I will put my Torah into their mind, and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a Elohim, and they shall be to me a people.
So, thank you, Minister. Thank you. So, Paul is referencing the prophet Jeremiah, and in my opinion, Paul is also the author of Hebrews, the letter to the Hebrews, because it really has his tone. And he's referencing a prophecy by Jeremiah that's only to Yasharel. It didn't say anybody else. He was referencing the renewed covenant. And it will tell you, if you read more of that section of the scriptures, you will see that it's referencing Yasharel, the salvation, Torah, the renewed covenant. They try to say new covenant in the New Testament in this particular reference right here. But when you read it, it's the same requirement. So how is it new? And when you read the word in the original Hebrew text in Jeremiah 31 and 33, the word new does not mean new, especially in the original Hebrew. It's renew.
Mm-hmm.
He's reestablishing his covenant with his people. He's coming back to the table and he's saying, listen, I could walk away from this. You're the ones that broke the contract, not me. But no, I'm not going to do that. Y'all going to honor my contract. And I'm bringing it back. So I'm renewing this contract with you. You don't even have a choice in the matter. Because you already said, yes, I got you.
Mm-hmm.
You're bound. You don't have a choice. So here, I'm back at the table. All right, I'm renewing this. He didn't change the audience. He didn't change he didn't go to the table to a different group of people. Because that's what the church will teach, that either they've been replaced with the church, some church doctrine says that, dispensationalism, or they'll say another group has been added. But that's not what Jeremiah said. Isaiah doesn't say it either. And others say, no one else came to the table. There was only two parties in this contract, this covenant. Yah and the ones he chose. Yasharel. All right? So this quote that Paul is pulling from, which is only to Yasharel, really helps you understand that the letter to the Corinthians, both of them, because I think we did very well with the first letter already. That's obvious that these Corinthians were not just some random groups of non-Hebrews. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody got anything to add to that?
Think we're good.
Nope. Okay. Let's continue. Now, like we said, Paul was talking of this renewed covenant. And you can see that in verse 6, just a little bit down, where he says, who also has made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit give life. Now, the word for New Testament here is the Greek word diatheke, which is a compact, a covenant. And it's Elohim's covenant with Noah and etc. So hold on. It's talking about specific covenants, right? If he says it's a covenant example as in the one with Noah, then you know he had one with Abraham, and you know he had one with Isaac, and you know he had one with Jacob and the 12 tribes. These are those covenants that this is referencing to. This is not new. Because if it was new, why would you mention the covenant? Why would you associate the covenant with Noah? That very old covenant. That doesn't make sense. You know, the English translation leads you to believe that Paul was ministering to the minister of the New Testament only. You know, the New Testament portion of the Bible as well, when they have that statement. So you have churches that will say that my ministries, if you don't find it in Paul's letters, we don't teach it, which is absolutely incredible. That tells you how they really don't know anything. But how could it be? Think about this. How could it be when the New Testament didn't exist in Paul's life? Christianity didn't exist. You want to claim it because you want to call the Messiah Christ. But the religion never existed during the first 400 plus years after the death of the Messiah. So how could this be when the context also is referencing a Hebrew prophecy anyway? So how is this a New Testament covenant? That's where when people argue that the Torah is no more because we're under the new covenant and they quote Hebrews 8, don't you understand that he's quoting Jeremiah 31:33 that's referencing Yasharel, Israel only? So Paul is really talking about a covenant between Yasharel, and or Jacob or Jacob. Thus, this really does tell us who the audience is. This is nothing new. Nothing new at all. All right? It's like buying a home and 10 years later or 5 years later, you go back and you renew your leasing arrangement. Did it change the house? Did it change the parties involved with the agreement because you refinanced your home? You're still committed to payments. You're still committed to a window, a length of time. All the commitments are the same. You just get a different price. And your monthly commitment might be different, but the parties are the same, everything. That's exactly what he did. He refinanced us. Like a refinance. So it didn't change the audience. It was still between the same bank and the same borrower, right? It would be with Yah and the same people. Didn't change. All right? So I think that was pretty clear. Anybody want to add to this? Want to expound or question?
I'd like to ask a favor, and I know this is going to be redundant, but just in case there are some people that are on for the first time, please explain to them the statement when you say that the New Testament did not exist during the time of the Apostle Paul, just in case there are some new people that are on just on this lesson.
Okay.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you, Minister. Keeps me focused right now. I appreciate it. Thank you. When it comes to the Bible, we have to understand that the Bible was not created by the Hebrews, the book that you see, the whole book. They didn't use a Bible during the time of the Messiah's life. In fact, if you had to read scriptures, you didn't read them pretty much yourself unless you were a teacher like a Pharisee, Sadducee, and so on, or a priest. Paul was one of those, so he had access to scrolls and so on, but the normal person did not, so they would have to go to the synagogue or to a temple to hear readings and be taught firsthand. The book itself was created by non-Hebrews, brought together by non-Hebrews. They took the writings of the Hebrews and put them in a book to be read, to be able to be read by a certain population. That book was not created until about the 4th century Common Era, after the death of the Messiah, 400 plus years. That's including what they call the New Testament. During the Messiah's time, Paul's letters, Peter's letters, James' letters, John's letters, and books and whatever were not written yet. Paul was living his letters, so how could he teach from his letters? He lived his letters, then wrote them during his lifetime. So he never taught from them, nor anybody else. In fact, Peter warns us about the difficulties of Paul's writing, that they can lead people. People can misconstrue to their own damnation because they don't understand. So the New Testament, especially the New Testament side, was not brought together by Hebrews, and it was not even written yet during the disciples' lifetime, Paul and all. Okay, is that good enough? Might have been too much. Is that good enough?
No, it wasn't too much. I just wanted to add one more piece to highlight, and that is when Brother Andrew is mentioning about the Bible was put together. He means the compilation of it. The compilation of it was not done by Hebrews. That's what he means. He's not saying that we have foreign writings in the book. He is just saying the bringing together of all that was written by the Hebrew was done by groups of individuals who were non-Hebrew. Non-Hebrew. So the compiling of the Bible were put together. The compilations were put together by Hebrew groups, and it was done after Paul's times, not before. So the New Testament didn't exist during his time. Thank you, Brother Andrew.
Yeah, that's correct. You're welcome. Thank you, Master. All right. So let's go ahead and continue. All right. So like we were speaking to Jeremiah 31 and 31, where we were talking about the word new. But like I told you, the original Hebrew doesn't say that. And this is to show you that for certain. The word renew, excuse me, is, how do I say this? What is that? That is Kadash. Am I saying that right? Kadash, I believe. And if it's not, please correct me, Minister.
Oh.
And it is to make something like new through repair, restoration, or replacement. In the KJV, it's defined as renew or repair. Did I pronounce that right, Minister? Like, is it Kadash?
I was pulling it up because I don't see it.
Yeah, I didn't have it spelled out here. Normally I spell them out, so I apologize.
That's okay.
Normally I spell it out. There's more than one definition, so I decided to put both just to fill it so you can understand that both definitions speak to the same. Something that is new, renewed, restored, or repaired. So when you think of the context of this word, how the Hebrew text is using this word for Jeremiah 31:31, you realize that it's clear that this covenant is nothing new because because this covenant, use the typo, requires the same requirement of the original covenant, Torah. Because he says, I will write my law, my Torah, in your fleshly parts, right? Inside you. All right, so we have to understand if it has the exact same requirements as the previous covenant, the exact same requirements, how is it new? I'm bringing the same contract to the table. You're just going to have to adhere to it. I'm not changing it just because you wanted to act up. What kind of Heavenly Father will we have? Well, he creates a contract between two. This is how the church expects it, right? I'm going to create a contract between you and me. And because you broke it, I'll change it because you broke it and make it something different for you. And now I'm going to simplify it. I'm going to get rid of everything and just give you two laws. That's it. That doesn't make sense. Why would he do that? Because it's a love, because he loves everybody. If you believe that, then you don't read your Bible correctly at all, because it's obvious you don't. He can be quite serious We know that anybody that reads the Bible about and really pays attention, Yah's no joke. Our Heavenly Father's no joke. So, no, we don't want that type of father who sits here and says, and bows down to our demands by changing his contracts on our expectations. Now I don't have to do anything but say. I don't even have to demonstrate it because they say there's no works. All I got to say is, oh, I love you and my neighbor. I'm good. And I believe in JC. I'm good. That's what the church really teaches today. So just to let you know that the word new that's in there, which Paul references, never meant that. Not in the original Hebrew. And that's what this pictorial or Paleo Hebrew, some people call it, means. The word never meant new. It meant renew, which is to restore.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anybody have any comments or questions?
Just to confirm, your enunciation of the word is correct. Kadash.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Well, let's continue. And Brother David, we're going to move to 2 Corinthians 3:13 through 16. Brother David, do you mind reading that for me, please?
Yes. And not as Moses, which put a veil over his face, that the children of Israel could not steadfastly look to the end of the which is abolished, but their minds were blinded. For until this day, redeemed the same veil and taken away in the reading of the Old Testament, which veil is done away in Messiah. But even unto this day, when Moses is read, the veil upon their hearts, nevertheless, if their hearts shall turn to Yahuwah, the veil should be taken away.
All right. Thank you, Brother David. So, why would the Torah? I love these verses. This is heavy, and people don't appreciate it. The church has no idea what he's saying here. Why would Torah, the scriptures written by Moses, be read at this time? Because that's what he's saying. He says, until this day, it still remains the same veil that they had in the wilderness. According to scholars, this letter was written 55 years after the death of the Messiah. So it was still being read. You're telling me, Yasharel, none of them got that letter that the church says that was broadcasted, that the law is done away with? Because that's what he's quoting here. The books of the primary books of the law were written by Moses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is what he's quoting. But what I love and what's more significant is Mashiach removes the veil blinding Yasharel's understanding of Torah. Oh, shoot. I thought, Mashiach got rid of it, nailed it to the cross. So why would Mashiach be the one to remove the veil that makes you, that restores or brings about understanding?
Mm-hmm.
If he's the one that nailed it to the cross. Mm-hmm. This is what lies do. They create contradiction. Because there's another part where in Colossians, I think it's in Colossians, 2nd chapter Colossians, where they say, oh, he made a shoe of them, nailing it to the cross. And let no man judge you. But the point is, now you got Paul saying two different things. Mm-hmm. That Mashiach removes the veil so you can understand Torah, but at the same time, he nailed it to the cross. Mm-hmm. Doesn't make sense. Fix that contradiction. Mm-hmm. And you have to learn, understand, and put it together, but also get past some of these translation lines. Mm-hmm. So with this type of conversation with the Corinthians, speaking of how Mashiach will remove the veil, he's not saying this for, why would you talk about a certain group of people being impacted by the Messiah's sacrifice that brought the understanding of Torah to a group of people that aren't related to him at all. They shouldn't even be involved in the conversation. It doesn't make sense. It would be like me going to my coworkers and talking about, some type of tragedy or death in my family and how that death happened 20, 30 years ago and how it's impacted my family financially. If I just came to them and started talking to them like that, they were like, well, why? Why? It doesn't make sense. It's irrelevant to me, really. I appreciate you sharing. I'll listen if that makes you feel better, but it has nothing to do with me. This is how the church expects us to just receive their doctrine. It doesn't make sense. All right. So far, we're following.
Yes.
Now Paul continues.
I'd like to speak, please.
Oh, please, Minister.
I'd like to focus on the last sentence there when it says the veil shall be taken away. I'm going to talk about that for a moment. How is the veil taken away and when is the veil taken away? And it says right before that, nevertheless, when their hearts shall turn to Yahuwah. Okay, then how does the heart turn to Yahuwah? So now we know that the veil is taken away when the heart turns to Yahuwah. How does that happen? It says, but let's go to the sentence before that. But even until this day, when Moshe is read, the veil is upon their heart. So for the veil to be taken away, when Moshe is read, which is the Torah, they must receive it in their heart. That is how the heart is turned back to Yahuwah. And that is how the veil is taken away, by the accepting of the law that Moshe gave, which was the Torah. And it says, but even unto this day. So until the church accepts the law, what they call the law of Moshe, which is the Torah, until they accept it, then they have not turned back to Yahuwah. It says it right here. And the veil will not be taken away until you fall into obedience to his law.
Yes, ma'am. And that's true, because whenever somebody's heart turns to anything, we know what that means. If my heart turns to my wife, if my heart is towards my wife, that is love. We know that. I don't have to explain that. That's what they're talking about here. So what does John says in chapter 14? If you love me, keep my commandments. And then he says further down in chapter 14, if a man keeps my words, it is him the Father and I will dwell with. It's conditional. It's conditional, right?
Yes.
But you're not going to turn your heart to him just by words. He says keep. That's an action. That's an action verb. That's a verb, right? There's something to do there. Your works are your obedience to Yah and to his command. The Bible tells you how to love him. You can't sit here and tell me how to love Yah by your own opinion. Just like if you tell me that you love me, show me. Show me. How does Yah know you love me? Because you say it? Because you live a certain way? You got to show me. It's more than just saying, oh, well, I dress a certain way, or I don't do all the other things I used to do. Well, what does the Bible say? The Bible tells you how to love them. That's one of the biggest problems the church has. They set the standard of what is love when Yah tells you how he wants to be loved. I don't think anybody would accept love just from anything. There's a certain way everybody wants to be loved. You think Yah's different? Nope. Don't make sense. All right. Thank you, Minister Ronnie. Anybody else?
Yes, right. He said that obedience is better than sacrifice. So your obedience to him is your sacrifice. So That's what he's looking for. He's looking for your obedience to the Torah. Just like he said, I will write my laws on their hearts, their minds, so they will not sin against me. So there goes the heart again. It's the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is you don't want to obey the laws.
That's really it.
That's really it.
That's really it. You want your own form of righteousness.
Exactly.
You don't think obedience is a sacrifice? Ask anyone who lives by Yah's will and tell me they don't sacrifice. Tell me they haven't experienced it. Please. Everybody that lives according to the truth got a testimony. Shoot, whatever. It is a sacrifice to be obedient. In this world, this evil time, you better believe there's a sacrifice to being obedient to Yah. All right. So, Brother David, do you mind reading this next verse for me? One more verse for
me. Yes, of course. But we all, with open face, beholding in as in a glass the glory of Jehovah, are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of Jehovah.
All right, thank you. Oh, come on, computer. There we go. So let's put it all together. And with open faces is wonderful word. So we're going to talk about that. The previous text states the following. I want us to put it all together. I don't want us to forget what we read. Verse 14 and 15 says, Yasharel has a veil over the hearts, right? In the understanding of the covenant, the Old Testament, the Torah. They're not separate, by the way, church. The church audience. They might say the covenant is something different. You can't have the covenant and Torah separate. They are one and together. They come together. Verse 16 says, but when their hearts turn to Yah, the veil shall be removed. And verse 14 also said, this veil is removed by faith in Yahusha, right? The Messiah. So let's look at, so we got that understanding, right? But let's look at with open, which is really one Greek word. And it's, let me see if I can get it right. And anakaluto. Hope I got that right. It means to unveil, to uncover. All right? So finally, Paul states we. So he's including the Corinthians. He's including the Corinthians in his statement with himself. He's saying now we all are unveiled. We all are unveiled, right? Including themselves in the audience. How? Unveiled to do what? To understand what Yah's will is, which is Torah. Understand the covenant. And you be able to understand it, beholding it as clear as glass, the glory of Yahuwah. So there's no obscurity no more by a veil. There's a full understanding because of your faith in the Messiah. And your hearts then, through your faith of the Messiah, turns back to Yah, removing the veil, right, of what Moses wrote, which was the Torah and the covenant within those first 5 books. Paul is including himself and the audience in being unveiled. And he used reference Yasharel from that very beginning of this piece in 2 Corinthians. All right? Is there any questions with this one? Okie dokie. We'll keep it going. Let's move to the next slide. All right, brother, are you able to read?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 16. And what agreement hath the temple of Elohim with idols? Ye are the temple of the living Elohim. As Elohim hath said, I will dwell in them, and walk in them, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people.
All right, thank you, brother. Now, what is Paul quoting, right? What is Paul quoting? We got to understand that Paul is saying something. He's referencing something. So we look at Leviticus 26 and 12. This is Torah Paul is quoting. And I will walk among you and will be your Elohim and you shall be my people. He's quoting something that was specifically written to Yasharel only. And I'm going to say this over and over again. You cannot repurpose scripture. The audience is set. You can't take this and give it to another people just because you believe it's so. When does Yah change? Malachi said he never does. So the audience was set when it was first written and it's still to them. So Paul knows this, of course. So Paul is not going to repurpose a verse that was never intended for somebody else, especially people who never knew Yah, especially people who always hated his people. You're talking about other nations that have treated Yah's people quite cruel. Now all of a sudden the very precious scriptures and prophecies that were written to his people now apply to them as well? That don't make sense. It don't make sense. But if you read further, just to continue this point, Paul is still quoting the original scriptures. Sister Monique, can you read verse 17 and 18 for me?
Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith Yahuwah, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith Yahuwah Almighty.
Thank you, Sister Monique. Now, that scripture is obviously he's quoting something again. He's quoting something again. And it's not reference to anyone else. Okay? Now, Paul is quoting Isaiah 52, verse 11, and Isaiah 43, verse 6. Paul is speaking to unclean things or uncleanness, which is only defined in Torah. He would not reference something that's unclean, to stay away from unclean things. There was only one thing in his world that defined what was clean and unclean in Paul's eyes. Man couldn't do it. It was Torah. And he's talking about Torah because he just said Mashiach removes the veil for the understanding of it when our hearts turn to Yah. So he's not even teaching against the Torah, just like so many people say. The only audience in the scriptures that Yasharel, that Paul is quoting is Yasharel 100%. Now think about this. If Yah is received all, listen to the conditions that Isaiah said that is required. He says you got to come out from among them, and that's how you live and all that stuff, right? Be ye separate. What is separate? A Shabbat, sanctified, separated, saith Yahuwah, and touch not anything unclean. Then I will receive you. If he has that type of condition on his people, how in the world are nations of other peoples who don't know him at all, don't know his ways and will, period, are just going to be accepted? All of a sudden, this law that Paul is speaking to is not even important anymore. Throw it out. So those high standards Yah set for his people for thousands of years, he's just going to now throw it out the window because he's not going to hold nobody else to such a standard. Even though it was good for thousands of years, it's no longer really good now. I'm going to just throw it out the window, which then makes you think he does change, which now makes Malachi look like a liar. These are the type of reasoning that you need to have when you read and think back how the church teaches, so you can see that it's so contradicted. All right? Is there anyone who would like to add to this? Or any comments, questions? Nope. All righty.
We're all fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's go ahead now. I believe we have a very good, clear understanding that the letters to the Corinthians, without a shadow of a doubt, were letters to Hebrews who grew up outside of Israel in a Greek colony, so they were Hellenized, knew some truth of their identity, but still lived a mixed lifestyle, most likely, a sinful lifestyle, because they just did not have an understanding of Torah, which is Paul is speaking to in chapter 6. So Paul brought the truth to them, brought the Messiah to them. We know that the Corinthians were not Gentile or non-Hebrew people. They were not Greeks, as what we're taught the Greeks are. All right? So we're going to go now and move to the letter of Galatians, a very important letter that the church uses quite a bit to support now the Gentile is included through the Messiah, through faith in the Messiah. So let's go ahead and move into this one. So as I've said, no matter no matter how you look at it, Paul's letters, audience is always the same. And Paul's letter to Galatians begins with a purposeful translation change. I wanted to begin with this one, to speak to how the church, the translations of the early church, the Western from Rome, from the Latin in Rome, from the Greek, and then the Latin, and even the Protestant translations of the first English Bibles. They carried a lot of these lines with them, but Rome and the Greeks are the fathers of a lot of these lies. And I call them lies because it's done with purpose. It's absolutely done with purpose. So I'll read this one first. Galatians 1:15 through 16. But when it pleased Elohim, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the heathen, immediately I conferred not with flesh and blood. Now, we've talked in previous parts of this lesson series. We broke down the definition of Gentile quite thoroughly. And we showed how Gentile is translated from the Greek word ethnos, which is usually supposed to be translated to nation. But because the Western translators want to add audience that is not in the scriptures, they play with the translation using different words. They use heathen here. Sometimes they use Gentile. Sometimes they use Greek, and sometimes they do use nation. Why? Why not use one word that really means that word? Because I'm sorry, Greek, Gentile, and heathen mean completely different things. Then they'll say, well, they're all Gentiles, but they're particular audience of Gentiles. Then why is this one a heathen? This is not true, and this is the wordplay that the church uses. Now, the word ethnos, for nations, means a multitude associated or living together. So it's a nation, like a nation, a multitude of individuals of the same nature or genus, a tribe, nation, or people. All right, so we know that this word heathen is inserted, period. All right, period. It is inserted. And I want you to understand that this simply should be nation. Ethnos is almost always translated to Gentile in the KJV, though, in most English Bibles. But we know that Gentile does not mean all non-Hebrews, because we pointed out how using the word Gentile didn't even fit the context that it was translated in. And that the etymology or the origin of the word Gentile does not mean non-Hebrew. It meant a tribe. or a group of people, kinsmen. That's what the word Gentile really means. But it's been misused to mean something else to satisfy an agenda by the westernized church. Okay? So I just wanted to begin with this, that we cannot use this verse like the church uses, because we know that the word that's being used here as heathen never meant that, and the earlier parts of this lesson series demonstrates that. So we know right offhand, Galatians 1 and 15 cannot be, and 16 cannot be used like the church wishes to use that. All right? Excuse me. Is there anyone that wants to add anything or any questions? All right. Let's continue.
No, thank you.
All right. Galatians 2, 1 through 2. Then 14 years after I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, and took Titus with me also. And then I went up by revelation and communicated unto them that gospel which I preached among the nations, or Gentiles, right? But privately to them which were of reputation, lest by any means I should run or have run in vain. Now, we just spoke that heathen was ethnos, but Paul preached the same gospel in Jerusalem that he preached among the Gentiles. That doesn't make sense. Gentiles is the word ethnos, the same word that the heathens were. So now you're seeing the word play, right? You see the word play. Same word that was used. So what's in Jerusalem that Paul would preach there? What's there? Think about it. You know, excuse me. What was there was his people. That's what Paul was preaching for. He wasn't preaching to just random people. Why would Paul preach in Jerusalem? It was part of his ministry. Just because he's in Jerusalem doesn't mean he's going to stop. That everything had to do with Paul's life was outside of Judah, Jerusalem, and so on. And if his ministry was to non-Hebrews, why his message was the same between Hebrew and non-Hebrew? There was no difference. So why is it special? Why is Paul to the Gentile, as the church says, when the message is exactly the same? You don't need him then. Peter could have done the job. The people are the same, and we're going to prove this as we get into the letter. I'm just pointing out how the translators tripped themselves up by using Gentile in the wrong manner, of course, and translating ethnos in multiple ways, proving that there's purpose behind these translation switches and stuff like that. All right. Is there anybody that would like to speak to this or anything else?
Well, I have a question or comment. So what you're saying is that when Paul spoke in Corinth, he was speaking to a group of Hebrews at the time, and also in Jerusalem, he's speaking to another group of Hebrews at the time.
Correct. We have to take into context the environment. Now, there's a mixed multitude. We understand Jerusalem was conquered by Rome, and there's probably more than one group of people there. But who were the people that were interested in hearing the Torah? Because we just understood that Paul was talking of the Torah and teaching the Torah to the Corinthians. We just talked about that in chapter 6 in the second letter. Right? So,
Yeah.
since we know that, if Paul is teaching from that, there was no New Testament, we talked about that too. His bulk of the audience, especially in Jerusalem, would not have been just some random people. It would not have been. The audience, by understanding, using our common sense, the audience would have been Israel, because it would have been context that they're familiar with. So if he's preaching this same gospel to the Galatians that he preached in Jerusalem, why is it the same for two different groups of people? That wouldn't make sense. How would they know? What would they know? How would they relate to something that a Hebrew that grew up in it, who would have most likely been a lot of the audience in Jerusalem, would have been the same, would have been able to understand Paul's quote-unquote complicated approach to teaching, but yet they're Galatians and they're Gentiles, they're Greeks, they're non-Israelites, as we're told. But that's not the case. They were the same people. That's why he was able to preach the same gospel.
And also, Brother Andrew, from my understanding, when he went to these various places to teach, he also taught in the Hebrew language, which some, not all, of Greeks and Romans did not understand, but the ones that were the brethren of the Hebrews, they understood his language when he spoke to them in that language.
Good point.
That is a really good point.
Good point.
I would like to find that verse too. I would like to find that verse. If you can find it, please let the audience know to prove that point.
Yes,
That'd be a good point. Very good. That's a good point. I like that. I like that. Very good. Now, let's point out something. Somebody might say, well, the audience couldn't have been Hebrews because they didn't know anything. So why would he teach them this or that? Look at it this way. I was in paganism because Christianity is a pagan faith, but it had a taste of the truth. So when the truth came to me, and I was willing to listen to it finally, it was familiar. Some of it was familiar, of course, because I was already taught with a mingling of the truth. I already heard some of this before. And this is what you see in ministry today, right? And there's nothing new under the sun. Paul was experiencing these very experiences. He wasn't dealing with completely dumb, ignorant people that were completely out of pocket of what was going on in the world. Come on. Not at all. Not at all.
Brother Andrew.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to give you the scripture that you asked for. It's in Acts chapter 22, verses 1 through 2.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Let's continue. We're going to deal with Galatians 2, 3 through 4. Minister Ronnie, are you able to read?
I am. Yes.
Okay, please read for us.
But neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. And that because of false brethren unawares brought in, who came in privily to spy out our liberty, which we have in Mashiach Yahusha, that they might bring us into bondage.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Boy, these two verses are popular with the church because they're saying, see, the circumcision is no longer required, so the law is done away with. Because if you still believe in that stuff, then you'll be brought into bondage. Mm-hmm. Why would Paul say this? Why was Titus in this circumstance from the beginning? There's a lot we still don't know because it isn't like Paul wrote Galatians 2 to give you the aftermath of all this or the history of Titus. We don't know that. So, but we do got to understand why Paul says this can bring a person into bondage. All right? Yes, we have our freedom in Mashiach because we're free from what? Paul tells you that in Romans. We're free from sin and death. But if you put somebody into the covenant, sign of the covenant, without them understanding, guess what you're going to force them to do without them even realizing? Right? Into sin again. Putting them into bondage. because you put the sign of the covenant on them without them knowing what the covenant is. They're new converts. They barely know anything when it comes to the details of the covenant. How are you going to throw that symbol on, a very painful one at that, to grown men, and they don't even fully understand or appreciate it yet? Because of that, they will break this covenant because they don't know and don't understand, and you will put them in sin, which is bondage. Ignorant or not, everybody has to atone for it. Okay? That's what Paul is saying here. Now, why would Hebrews, all right, why would Paul push circumcision, or not Paul, but why would the other Hebrews push circumcision on non-Hebrews? Why would they take something precious like the sign of the covenant? They know what that means, and push it on a bunch of people that don't know what it means. It's not just being obedient to the law, it's a covenant sign. It's very serious. Now, Paul was speaking to the traditions of, excuse me, of Judaism, which he speaks of in Galatians 1 verse 14. And it was those traditions that put all of Yisrael into bondage, slave to sin. So to force circumcision on new converts immediately would force the traditions of Judaism, focusing on the works of Torah only, ignoring the importance of the sign of the covenant. Understanding the sign of the covenant and having the faith deeply rooted and established in Yahushua. That's what Paul was concerned with right here. Does that make sense? So you wouldn't do this to just anybody. And those Hebrews that were doing this was not, they recognized who these Galatians were. All right. Any questions? Any adds to this?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. Minister White, you mind reading this one?
Sure. Galatians 2, 7 through 8. But contrariwise, when they saw that the gospel of the uncircumcision was committed unto me, as the gospel of the circumcision was unto Peter, for he that wrought effectually in Peter to the apostleship of the circumcision, the same was mighty in me toward the Gentiles.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So in all of Paul's letters, he always used the word for nations to reference the audience for his ministry. You'll see Gentile in English, but the word really should be translated nation. All right?
Mm-hmm.
So why use the sign of the covenant to non-Hebrews? Why do that? Keep this in mind as we continue to read, okay? I want us to keep in mind as we continue to read. We're going to do one or two more slides. I want you to understand that just because Gentiles is in place here, or heathen, doesn't mean we're speaking to that audience. You think you've been raised to believe that the translation delivered to you is absolute truth. It's not the scriptures that are a lie. It's what man has done to them. It's what the early church has done to them. It's what the Protestant church has done to them. There are serious changes that have been done by the church. All right? And we need to understand that. I don't want you to think that I'm saying that the scriptures are wrong. It's not. It's what they did to a word here, word there, or they'll remove a little piece or add a little piece to change the audience or its definition. Okay?
Can I make a comment, please?
So keep this in mind. Yes, ma'am.
The two groups that we're looking at that Paul is discussing here, the gospel of the uncircumcision. He's talking about going to a people, his people, that are in other nations. Contrary or versus what Peter is doing. Peter is going to a familiar group, still his own people, still Hebrew Israelites, but these are people that are familiar, that know about the gospel of circumcision. So that's why I think he's showing the analogy that even though Apostle Paul went to those who were uncircumcised, he was effective with them just as Peter is effective with those who are circumcised. I think that's what Apostle Paul is trying to highlight here. Not that the law of circumcision is done away. Is how he's addressing it. He's highlighting it that these two groups of individuals, although they are both the tribes of Israel, but one group, who are called Gentiles, they are not familiar with this circumcision. So he calls it the gospel of uncircumcision. And Peter is dealing with those who are familiar with the gospel of circumcision. Both groups are still Yasharel.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Brother Andrew.
No, thank you, Master. Thanks for the ad. That's absolutely right. He's really dealing with two audiences. You're dealing with those who are already very familiar with Torah life, the kingdom, salvation, the Messiah, and Peter's ministry was involved with all of that. Paul traveled all around. And you know that just by reading the text. Okay? So here's a verse on the coming slide here I particularly like, and this will be our last one for the night, I believe. Let's see. Yes. I like this because this verse teaches you to look at the scriptures from a cultural perspective, historically, culturally, and so on, because you have to make sense of what you're really reading. And I can bless the Most High for bringing this out because I read it and it just dropped in me. O foolish Galatians, chapter 3, verse 1. Who has bewitched you that ye should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Yahushua Mashiach hath been evidently set forth, crucified among you? So think about this. The audience in Galatia were present when Yahushua lived. All right? So if so, think about this. How, since Yahushua did not travel in Turkey, he did not. Modern day Galatia or Galatia is modern day Turkey. It's in Turkey, hundreds of miles away. So how did they behold the crucifixion of the Messiah when they lived so far away? Now think about it. This is significant because you didn't drive by car or plane back then, right?
Right.
It took huge efforts to travel such a distance. It would take quite a bit of effort. And you would have had to do it for a serious purpose. So the only reason someone from Galatia would leave their flocks or businesses for days on end, the only reason would have and to be present at that time. It's significant. Traveling hundreds of miles, many days, is to keep something mandatory, a pilgrimage, a feast day. Yahushua was crucified during Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread. This was a mandatory pilgrimage feast day by all Hebrews. You would pilgrimage, travel to Jerusalem. And you had to do that every year for Passover. Because they were present during his crucifixion in Jerusalem, tells you why they were there. They didn't come there to see his crucifixion. They just happened to be there the day he was crucified. and they were witnesses to his crucifixion. He says it here, before whose eyes, your eyes, Yahusha crucified among you.
Mm-hmm.
Among you.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't have, now think about this. You could stand in the highest mountain, or highest hill, I would say, in Jerusalem. You're not going to see Galatia. It's quite far. You have to do some serious traveling to get to Jerusalem. It takes serious effort. So you have to think like this. Bless Yah. You have to think like this to see that if someone witnessed Yahusha and they were Gentiles, then why are they in Jerusalem during the Passover? How would they see it when they lived so far away?
Mm-hmm.
Jerusalem is in the southern kingdom. Turkey's above the northern kingdom. Above the northern kingdom. That's a long way.
Mm-hmm.
I hope people understand that. That's significant.
Mm-hmm.
Any adds or any questions?
I think you got it.
All right. Well, we're in the lesson here and continue further in Galatians to speak to further details, small pieces, small words, little words, one phrase here and there to point out the true audience of the letters to the Galatians. All right. So please, we thank you all for joining the House of Shiloh Ministry. Please join us again as we continue in this series of I think we're in part 9 or 10 coming up. I always do this. I apologize. But when we get to the next part, how about that? And we continue in Paul's letters, defining his audience, the Pauline epistles. Shalom, everyone.
Shalom.